If you have been resting your plantar fasciitis and it keeps coming back, the rest isn't a problem. It's also not the solution. Here's what I mean. Most runners with plantar fasciitis go through the same cycle. The heel hurts first thing in the morning. Those first few steps out of bed feel like someone's pressing a nail into the bottom of your foot. You rest for a week, it gets better. You start running again, and 2 weeks later, sometimes within a single long run, it's back. And this time it takes longer to settle. So you rest again. Maybe you stretch your calf, maybe you roll a frozen water bottle under your foot, maybe you buy insoles, and the cycle continues. If that sounds familiar, I want to offer you a different explanation. I'm going to walk you through what plantar fasciitis actually is, what really driving it, why the rest and stretch approach keeps people stuck, and what the evidence base is suggesting at the moment. By the end of this video, you have a clearer picture of your heel than before. Let's get started. Let's start by clearing up the most fundamental misunderstanding about this injury. The name itself is the problem. Fasciitis, that itis suffix, it means inflammations. And for decades, that's exactly how this injury was understood. Inflamed tissue at the bottom of the foot, which meant the logical treatment was anti-inflammatory. Rest it, ice it, take ibuprofen, don't provoke it. And that model wasn't invented from nothing. Early biopsy studies did show inflammatory markers in the plantar fascia. Here's where it starts to unravel. Later studies, using more precise technique, look at the tissue with chronic plantar fasciopathy. And what they found was striking. There was very little evidence of active inflammations. What they found instead was degenerative tissue. Disorganized collagen, thickening, cellular changes that look less like inflammation and more like what you are seeing in a tendon that have been chronically overloaded. This led using a different term, plantar fasciopathy. The opathy suffix means disorder or dysfunctions, not inflammations. Now this might sound like a semantic detail, but it has enormous practical implications. Because if it's not inflamed, rest, ice, and anti-inflammatories aren't treating the underlying problems. They might reduce your pain in the short term, but they are doing nothing to address why the tissue became degenerated in the first place. Let me explain what the plantar fascia actually is, because this is important. The plantar fascia is a thick band of connective tissue that runs along the bottom of your foot. Think of it like a bowstring. It connects your heel bone, the calcaneus, to the base of your toes. And it plays a critical role in absorbing and releasing energy with every step you take. When your foot hits the ground, the arch flattens slightly. The plantar fascia stretches. It stores elastic energy, like a spring being compressed. Then as you push off, the arch recoils. The fascia shortens. That stored energy gets released, helping to propel you forward. This mechanism is called the windlass mechanism, and is one of the most efficient energy storage systems in the human body. Here's what's important to understand about that process. The plantar fascia is under significant tension every single time you take a step. And for most people, most of the time, that's completely fine. The tissue is strong, it adapts, it handles load. Problem begins when the load exceeds the tissue's capacity to handle it. It's not like tearing a muscle, but chronically, gradually over the time. And the tissue, unable to keep up with the demand being placed on it, starts to show the kind of degenerative changes those later biopsy studies were finding. This is the same basic model we now use for tendon injuries. And it is important because the solution is similar. What actually driving it? If plantar fasciitis is a load management problem, what's driving the load? This is where I want to challenge something most people assume when they got this injury. The common assumption is, I must have weak feet. And sometimes that's a factor, but it's rarely the whole story. In my little experience, plantar heel pain almost always have more than one driver. And understanding all of them is what separates the people who get rid of it permanently from the people who manage it in cycle for years. Let me walk you through the one, a sudden change in training load. This is the most common trigger I see in runners. Not necessarily a massive jump. Sometimes it's going from 4 runs a week to 5. Sometimes it's adding a long run after weeks off. Sometimes it's switching from a cushioned shoe to a flat one. The plantar fascia has a capacity, an amount of load it can handle in a given period. When you push beyond that capacity without giving it time to adapt, it starts to break it out. The tissue doesn't send you a clear warning signal early on. The early stages of fasciopathy can feel like mild stiffness, the kind of thing most runners push through. By the time it's sharp pain in the morning, the tissue has already been struggling for a while. Driver 2. Reduced calf and Achilles capacity. Here's something that doesn't get nearly enough attention. The calf, specifically gastrocnemius and soleus, loads the plantar fascia. When your foot hits the ground and the heel starts to rise, the calf is pulling the heel upward by the Achilles tendon. That pulling force transmits load through the heel into a plantar fascia. Now imagine the calf is not strong enough or not eccentric strong enough to control the load smoothly. The plantar fascia takes on more than it should every single step, across hundreds of thousands of steps. This is why some of the most effective treatment protocols for plantar fasciopathy don't target the foot at all, they target the calf. Driver 3. Reduce hip and glute capacity. This one surprises people the most. But think about it mechanically. If your glutes aren't strong enough, if your glutes are not doing their job by controlling your pelvis and your hip rotations, your foot compensates. It pronates more and causing the arch collapses slightly further than it should with each step. And every time the arch collapses, the plantar fascia is being stretched under load. Over a long run, that adds up fast. I've seen runners with persistent plantar heel pain who had perfectly strong feet, but their hip mechanics were driving the whole thing. If you fix the hip, the foot sorts out itself. Driver 4. Body mass and footwear. I want to be direct about this one without making anyone feel judged. Body mass is a legitimate load driver for the plantar fascia. The tissue has a capacity. More mass means more load per step. This doesn't mean people with higher body mass will always get this injury, because most people don't. But if someone's already close to the edge of their capacity, it's a relevant factor in the overall picture. Footwear matters too, more than most people realize. Shoes with little heel support increase the mechanical demand on the plantar fascia and Achilles. Driver 5. The morning pain cycle. This one is worth a specific explanation because it confuses people. The classic presentation of plantar fasciopathy is pain on the first steps after rest. Worse in the morning. Gets slightly better after you're moving, but then worsens again if you are on your feet for a long time. Why the first steps? While you sleep, your foot is in a plantar flex positions, toes pointing slightly downward. The plantar fascia is shortened. When you stand up and take weight, the fascia is suddenly stretched under load from its shortened resting state. That rapid stretch of already sensitized tissue is what creates that sharp nails in the heel sensation. It's not that rest made it worse, it's that rest didn't address the underlying tissue quality. And the rapid transition from shortened to loaded is painful. This is actually one of the arguments against prolonged rest. By the way, it doesn't improve the tissue. It might reduce the pain signals temporarily, but the structure hasn't changed. Let me now make explicit why the rest and stretch approach often keeps people stuck. It goes back to the model. If this is an inflammatory problem, rest makes sense. You're allowing the inflammation to settle, you're removing the provocations. But if it's a load management and tissue quality problem, rest doesn't fix the tissue. It removes the load temporarily, the pain subsides, you feel better, you go back to running, the load returns. The tissue hasn't actually changed, the pain comes back later. This is the rest-return cycle that so many runners are stuck in. What about stretching? Calf stretching and plantar fascia stretchings are both commonly recommended, and they are not useless. There is some evidence that plantar fascia stretching in particular can reduce morning pain. But stretching alone doesn't address the underlying tissue quality. It doesn't build the load capacity the tissue needs to tolerate running. Think of it this way, if you had a tendon with disorganized collagen, reduced ability to handle load, you wouldn't treat it by stretching it. You would treat it by progressively loading it. The plantar fascia is not a tendon, but it responds to load in similar ways. What about orthotics and insoles? Orthotics can be useful pain management too. They can offload the plantar fascia, reduce the stress per step, and allow you to keep moving without provoking the tissue. What about corticosteroid injections? This is a question I've came across a lot of time. Steroid injections can reduce pain, sometimes dramatically, and fairly quickly. And the evidence on their long-term benefit is mixed. And there are specific concerns about repeated injections, including the risk of plantar fascia rupture with multiple injections over time. One injection used strategically to get someone out of pain crisis and into a loading program can be appropriate. Multiple injections as a primary treatment strategy, the evidence doesn't support that. The evidence base for plantar fasciopathy has improved significantly over the last 10 to 15 years, and the direction of travel is clear. Load management and progressive loading are the effective treatment. Let me walk you through what that actually looks like. Step 1. Understand where your load capacity. Before you start loading anything, you need an honest assessment of your current state. How much can you currently do before the pain flares? How much can you do right now, pain-free or with minimum pain? That is your baseline. You build from there, slowly, progressively, over weeks and months. Step 2. Calf loading. The most well-evidenced specific exercise for plantar fasciopathy is the single leg calf raise off a step. Here's how it works. You stand on a step with your heel hanging off the edge. You rise up on your toes and focus on the lowering phase, the eccentric phase, which is the most important part. This loads the calf and the Achilles, which has a direct effect on the load the plantar fascia does during running. Has a direct effect on the load the plantar fascia takes during running. Try 3 sets of 15 repetitions twice a day, progressing over 12 weeks. That sounds tedious, but it's one of the most consistent findings in the plantar fasciopathy literature. Step 3. Intrinsic foot strengthening. The small muscles of foot, intrinsics, help control arch positions and absorb force. When they are weak, the plantar fascia has to do more of the work. Exercises, toe spreads, and single leg balance work on different surfaces all contribute to building capacity in this area. Step 4. Reduce the load spike while the tissue is sensitized. This is not the same as rest. You are not stopping all activity. You are managing the total load on the plantar fascia each day. Practical examples such as running on softer surface temporarily, reducing weekly to 40% rather than stopping entirely. The goal is to keep the tissue loaded because loading drives adaptation, but to avoid the spikes that push it past its current capacity. Step 5. Address the proximal joints. Go back to that list from section 2. If your hip mechanics are contributing, you need hip work. If it was triggered by a sudden training load change, that habit needs to change. If footwear was a factor, that transition needs to be slower next time. Treating the foot without addressing the joint is like fixing a leak without turning off the tap. I'm going to be very direct with you here. Plantar fasciopathy is not a 2-week injury. In my experience, proper managed case takes 3 to 6 months to fully resolve. Some people improve significantly in 6 to 8 weeks, others are dealing with it for a year. The difference is whether they did the work consistently, or whether they stopped loading as soon as the pain quieted and went back to their old habits. The tissue needs time to remodel. You can't rush them. But here's the encouraging part. The research is clear that most cases of plantar fasciopathy do fully resolve with conservative management. Surgery is rarely needed. Injections are beyond one. The majority of people with a proper loading program and load management get back to full running without long-term consequences. You're not stuck with this, but you do need to be patient with it. Let me put this puzzle together. Plantar fasciitis is almost certainly not what you think it is. It's not primarily an inflammation problem. It's a load management problem. It's a breaking down of the plantar fascia caused by the load that exceeded the tissue's capacity to handle it. That shifts everything. It means rest alone won't fix it. It means anti-inflammatories are managing symptoms, not addressing the cause. It means the solution is progressive loading. Cough, intrinsics, and the whole kinetic chain above the foot. The thing I want you to take away from today is this. Your plantar fascia is a degenerative tissues and it can be remodeled. It can adapt and it can get stronger, but it needs load. Progressive, well-managed, consistent load over time. If this gives you a different lens on what you've been dealing with, share it with someone who is stuck in that rest-return cycle. They might have been chasing the wrong thing for a long time. And if you want to go deeper on the specific exercises and loading progressions, that's the next video in this series. See you later.